Hails and welcome to Rauta's Beherit retrospective. As you might have seen lately, I've been doing retrospective videos for the past year or so of the bands I've been interviewing. Why so? Because it's so nice to go back to these albums, go back to just listen to how it actually was and how the game have changed and all that stuff. That being said, Archgoat, Imbel Nazarene, Cannibal Corpse, and a lot of other bands already. Some of them I have interviewed, some of them I have not. Now let's talk about Beherit, the mighty Beherit, which is more so nowadays back on the map than maybe ever before, because past less than a year or so, the band has been touring once again, doing more gigs and whatnot. And of course, my future seer skills will tell you that's exactly what's going to happen also in the future. So we're going to see more Beherit gigs in the coming months. And as such, of course, this is a very, very perfect time to talk about the band, their impact, their music, and beyond on this given video. I'll try to make it not too long, but as you probably know my style, I'm going to fail at it. But let's give it a go. So, Finnish black metal. What to talk about it back in the 80s? Not really much. Because as you know, a lot of things really weren't happening in the world of black metal. Even if we go to countries like Norway and a lot of other places, nothing much was really happening in the world of black metal back in the 80s. Especially the early years. I mean, Sweden had Bathory. Switzerland had Celtic Frost. Of course, UK had Venom. And we could go for and say, yes, Denmark had Merciful Fate. But what about the other countries? You know, there was things bubbling under in Norway, but you really can't call, say, early Mayhem or Dark Throne really black metal as such. Surely they made their way and paved the way for a lot of black metal bands, but back in the 80s, things were not that obvious. Same goes pretty much for Finland. Before early 90s, nothing really was happening in the world of black metal. I mean, with the local bands anyway. There were few names, and those few names are very, very few indeed, like Imbel Nazarene and Archgoat, and of course Mighty Beherit, which started just before the new decade, 1990. But 1990 was the year when they actually released something under the moniker of Beherit. And as many of you know, they had various names back in the days, Horny Malformity, Pseudo Christ, etc. Anyway, Beherit is the name that stuck, the name that really made them the name with the music and all. And of course, the lineup has changed throughout the years, and basically it has been more or less just one guy in the band who really, really made it, happen like that. Nuclear Holocaust of Vengeance, or just NHV, something like just Holocausto. Like if you take a look at the past list, you will see people like Demon, Fornication, Black Jesus. Nowadays wouldn't have really with a different tone when it comes to the name, etc. So there were different people back in the early 90s and all that stuff, but two guys more or less stuck with the band, Holocausto and Sodomatic Slaughter. But even Sodomatic Slaughter was goner from a band for a long time. And I mean, if you take a look at here, a couple of years with the drums, whereas Holocausto was back and forth with the band when it was in and out, doing the music. But as you also know that Beherit hasn't been full black metal band all the time. I mean, even if I'm going to get stretched the term band beyond, what it is, more than two people. I mean, more than one people, that is. Beherit has been going solo project. Beherit has been going outside metal, back and forth throughout the years. So it kind of becomes a weird thing. How can you get away with such thing and, have this cult status maintained? I mean, of course, Norway has Burzum, and that career isn't that different except for the prison time and getting weird blocks online, but musically, you go for black metal first, then you do some synth music, then you do more black metal, and again back to some dungeon synth and ambient and all. Beherit has been doing similar path, but also quite different in the terms of the whole career with the music and all. Now, if you take a look at the Metal Archive site for Beherit, for instance, you will see that this is mainly dotted with splits and demos and EPs and compilations, more so than full albums. But of course, Beherit has a few full albums. It's just so curious that they have less metal albums than what they have albums that are outside metal, which makes this really weird case. I mean, if you compare this to any of those early black metal bands in the business, and business doesn't really mean money here, but the scene, you will find out that it's kind of a curious beast because, like I said, there are more albums that go outside metal and it's all that weird, and there have been pauses between the career and all. But still, Beherit is one of those most worshipped, most how to say, embraced acts from the Finnish scene. And for obvious reason, they were early on there, but the music is quite far from being really approachable. The same thing which is with Archgoat. They both kind of ended their metal careers, their black metal careers rather early on, fortifying their cult status as the forefathers of Finnish black metal, but also meaning that they were not exactly doing their careers as, say, Mayhem or Emperor or Enslaved, what have you, Dark Thrones, because while those bands kept doing albums one after another, these two, Archgoat and Beherit, were like gone. So yes, they made their cult footprint on the soil very, very early on, but they also vanished from the scene, only to come back later. And whereas Archgoat kept going very, very, how to say, solid steps afterwards, making album after album, staying true to their course, Beherit was like, fuck it, we're gonna just do something weird, what do we want? And it's not your typical approach to black metal. And this could go as much as Mr. Holocausto as a person, you know, not really sticking to your classic Satan-worshipping, goat-bearing guns and all that stuff. Archgoat once again, or whatever Impel Nazarene kept going, album after album, their own goat, nuclear war, Black Death, kind of a weird metal. Anyway, Beherit did their own stuff. There was Buddhism, there were ambient albums, there were albums that go beyond ambient, more like synth stuff, but not really dungeon synth, not really dark ambient, not really synth wave, just more esoteric stuff. And yet people are like, wow, Beherit. I mean, I get it. It's different. It's unique. And it is kind of a captivating. But it's also, you know, some of these albums are the ones that really divide people into two camps. Those who worship whatever Beherit does in the same fashion as Burzum, and those who are like, what the hell is going on here? And you can see it with albums like H41, whatever, having these kind of weird low scores because it's not really the kind of sticking to guns you know. All right, enough the intro babble about Beherit and the early story with the music and how it changed and all. Now, like I said, much like every other band back in the days, Beherit started with demos. I mean, that's the kind of a given path. And these were not totally welcome, like, hey, it's the greatest stuff on earth, but some people were probably saying back in the days, like, what is this noisy shit? They can't even play their instruments, and it's very clumsy and raw and whatever. Because that's exactly what it is. That's part of the charm for a lot of people who are looking for the early steps. I mean, compare it to the early steps of whatever Blasphemy were doing in Canada, late 80s. It's obvious that this band impacted Sarcophago as well, what Beherit were doing. And those first steps were kind of a clumsy. You really can't compare to these early demos to, say, Sarcophago's Inri album, one of the most impactful albums ever to come from Latin America, and impacting as such a lot of black metal bands, death metal bands, black death bands, black trash death bands, etc. So whatever Beherit did early on was kind of a typical, and of course demos are demos for a reason. It wasn't until Dawn of Satan's Millennium, and even I would call that a stretch, more like the Oath of a Black Blood, which has been often disputed, like what it is really. Is it a compilation? Is it an album? Whatever it is. Point here is, it was only a bit later after these demos, we're getting back to the recordings and all that stuff, when Beherit finally got the engine going properly. Pretty soon, if you ask me, because there's only a couple of years difference here. I mean, starting from 1988, basically, But even if with Beherit we start early 90s and suddenly 1991, things were quite different. But like I said, the same kind of a thing was happening with the early Dark Thrones and Mayhems and whatnot. You had the first demos and then you started honing and figuring out what you want to do, getting better with your instruments, and then suddenly also the tracks became a lot better, more captivating, and getting the unique feeling. So in my opinion, there is a big jump from these early demos to whatever Oath of Black Blood is, because this is in a way the kind of a milestone release, having the raw, unique black metal style coming from Finland. Surely there are similarities to early Archcode stuff, but not that much, for example, with Impel Nazarene or Barathrum for that matter. So definitely not sounding Norwegian acts, nor the Greek acts, which were actually happening around the same time, late 80s, very, very early 90s. So definitely unique feel and sound. This and Archcode are not like your typical Nordic black metal things. Surely you can see and hear the blasphemy, sarcophago, and whatever vibe, but just still being said, I want to make it sure you get it. It's very, very different than when you compare it to, say, the early versions, which were very, very more melodic and one could even say more atmospheric, whereas these were very, very much more into bestial black metal, simplistic, raw, coming from the dungeons and caverns and whatnot. So all very, very different. One thing is worth mentioning is that geographically, bands like Impel Nazarene and Beherit were very, very far away from anything that was happening down in the south of Finland. For example, Archcode from my home city, the difference is like closer to around 1,000 kilometers, maybe 900, whatever it is, the actual distance that is. There's a big geographical distance when we go to Lapland, like Rovaniemi, which is the central city of Lapland in Finland. So very, very Nordic. Even if you compare it to Sweden or Norway, you will see that it has nothing to do with the Bergen scene or Oslo scene, Stockholm scene, Helsinki, Turku, whatever, the southern cities. Turku, Helsinki are roughly like on the same level as Oslo and Bergen. So quite south in terms of Nordic countries, but of course very north if you compare to any Central European or Southern European countries. What I'm saying here that the scene was nothing like intact or the same thing. There were a couple of bands basically, Impel Nazarene, Beherit, and you could later on add bands like Black Crucifixion, Belial or whatever. But these were the early birds, and Beherit was basically more or less alone. Even though always very, very north, I would still say like Impel Nazarene and Beherit, geographically different scenes and all. But of course, people kept correspondence, writing letters to one another, etc. So while the scene was scattered, obviously we had electricity and mailing and all that stuff. So yeah, tape trading and all that stuff, of course, was very much there and affected people, like getting tapes and then inspired by the music and all that stuff. And this is not something that I made up. Of course, I've been reading about Beherit interviews. I've been making the interviews and all that stuff. So yeah, while I was barely a teenager kid, back in 1990, 15 or so, of course, these a little bit older kids, they had already figured out the tape tradings and whatnot, and things were different. So I'm saying all these might have happened very, very quickly if you compare nowadays bands who might have like a album 5 years later after forming a band, or sometimes bands do it very, very quickly too. But back in the days, you didn't just march into a studio. Nobody had a computer and recording equipment to just start doing right now. You probably had to rehearse a lot, figure it out, get some money, pulls together, pull it up, and then just book some studio time and then make things happen and hope that there would be a label or someone interested in distributing, maybe financing things and all that stuff. What I'm explaining is this is very, very different from nowadays when everybody can just, grab their smartphones and, tablets and laptops and all that, start recording wherever. Nowadays, you can literally take your charged laptop to woods, set up a couple of microphones and start recording and say, yeah, this is the Ulver stuff. We go to the woods and start doing stuff. More than 30 years ago, it was a very, very different world. You just didn't do that. Even normal PC computers, they were expensive as fuck, and you really didn't do recording like that back in the days. So take my word for it. Back in the early 90s, whole different world. Anyway, let's move on, because otherwise this video will take 2 hours. So, Early on, they had these things recorded. They started making impact with the tape recording, tape trading and all. And suddenly there was this official debut album, Turning Down the Moon, which is, I guess, most often seen as the Beherit album. Being very unique in nature, combining raw element of black metal with the whispers and all, very hypnotic, simplistic riffs, and then also those ambient parts, which would come into play quite quickly. Way more quicker than, say, what Burzum did. I mean, few albums in first, then going to some dungeon prisons and time. But Beherit was already doing it in 1994, like, fuck it. The band, as we knew it as a black metal band, was already gone. So by the time, for example, when I was 18 and, kind of basically I could have been expecting to see these bands live. I mean, 1993 was the Drawing Down the Moon. I was turning 18. And bands like Impel, Nazarene and whatever, they were like getting also bigger. They were making gigs and all that stuff. But Beherit was basically gone in the sense of being a band that would do gigs and whatever. So 2 years later, things changed a lot. After the Mercedes Morts EP, which is highly respected one, and clearly continuation to whatever they started with, Dawn of the Satan's Millennium, The Oath of the Black Blood, and of course Turning Down the Moon. So suddenly there was these two albums back to back. Well, 2 years difference, but still. And these are nowadays, of course, pumped together like a big package, two albums. And suddenly these were like doing ambient and dungeons and kind of sounding or similarities with the style, that kind of synthesized music. And suddenly it was like a different band. Now, wasn't make big waves among us, but of course people knew Beherit back in the days already. I mean, 3 albums out by 1996, but nobody was like talking about this band in the same way already these days or years as people were talking about newer bands. Newer bands in quotation marks, because literally newer, but also like the same era. I'm talking about the Baratrums and the Hornas and the like that were only coming up in a couple of years later. But things were changing fast. So what Beherit more or less started with some other early names in Finland, they also left it quite quickly, paving the way, in a way, for some new era bands and all that stuff. But things changed quickly. So whatever you had getting accustomed for Oath of the Black Blood, Drawing Down the Moon, think of these as, whatever Dark Throne did with their Soulside journey. So people like, hey, death metal from Norway, cool, and suddenly no more. And people were disappointed. What is this black metal after the death metal ones? Beherit did the same with the black metal. Hey, cool, some raw rand of black metal. What is this dungeon music? What is this synthesizer music? What the fuck is going on? So quickly changing and in a way, I guess, disappointing a lot of people, but Beherit did what they did. Then became the big gap. After the late 90s, when there was these split compilations, basically recycled releases. Anyway, late 90s come and Beherit was basically no more. And hence you hear it. By the 1996 era, Beherit was no more and Holocaust had ventured to other businesses. And I guess much like others, nobody expected Beherit to come back. But they did with force in 2009 with Engram album, which was a weird, not that anticipated release, because suddenly it was back to doing raw end of black metal. But just some almost 20 years later, I mean 18 years more so if you compare to the early years. And now I gotta confess, Engram is my favorite Beherit album. No, I've never been a big fan of Drawing Down the Moon. It surely has its moments, there are cool parts and all, but also it's a little bit too much into crossovers, a hybrid album in a way, a crossover if you will, of ambience, synth, and well, raw end of black metal. So for me, it would be Engram first, then Oath of the Black Blood, and the rest happens after that. Now, we can skip the album like At the Devil Studio 1990 because obviously, while this was early on recorded, calling it a full album in such ways, yeah, you know what I mean. It's more like comparable to compilations as such rather than album that was made as such in a similar fashion than Engram or Drawing Down the Moon or whatever happened afterwards. Bardo exists 2020. Now, once again, you know this big gap here, Engram 2009, and suddenly Bardo exists 2020, 11 years difference. And this was getting into the world of dark ambient, so quite different from these more synthetic albums, which were combining synthesizer music to ambient parts and all. But suddenly Bardo Exist was really a dark ambient album, and I find it good. way better than what this 65% would give you an idea here. I would say it's an 8. And WBRRR, like it's called, the album a year ago, and which I missed back when it came out, I only recently listened to it, is a kind of a logical continuation whatever Bardo Exist happened. Now, of course, since that, there has been live releases because of the early years, and now the momentum is once again building. So you see these compilations like Dawns of Satan's Millennium and newer releases because people want to milk the cow that once was there. Now, nowadays, Beherit is, of course, playing both older black metal stuff and the synthesizer stuff. So it's going to be interesting. I haven't yet seen it because they started earlier on 2024 in Oulu. Too far from me, but people were asking, are you going to go? It's Beherit coming comeback. I can wait. And now they just a week ago, before making this video, played in Helsinki, another comeback show, and also outside of Finland, you know, like in, I think it was in Austria, if I remember correctly, the country. They played there. If it's Switzerland, don't shoot me for that. And they played in Japan and all that stuff. So you can really see the moment is building up and people want to see it. And like I said, I'm predicting they're going to play in near future in Finland and other places as well. So Beherit engine is strongly going and people want to see it. And what I've been told about these Beherit comeback shows, it's been successful. But the career has been interesting because whatever started with the early black metal ones soon changed into synthesizer music and later on became back into the world of black metal only to jump into the world of dark ambient. Now, the thing is, what can you tell about the lyrics, the themes? These are often said here as the Satanism, blasphemy, occult, darkness, mysticism. I guess if I wanted to sum down in one word, I would say mysticism. If you ever looked at Beherit lyrics, they are quite few. I mean, they are short and they are always very mystic. They're not exactly exploring a lot of things in a very clear fashion, meaning they are very vague in a lot of ways. Compared to a lot of bands which are more vocal, with the aggression, with the output, whether it's about Satan, whether it's about war, whether it's violence and death or Satan, Beherit has always been a little bit more distant. And in a lyrical sense, I cannot really praise Beherit that much. I mean, I get it, it's a chosen path to stay very vague and be very distant from your typical lyrical output. But as such, it's also disappointing. Because I'm a person who are looking for lyrics to be inspiring, to tell me something that, you know, touches deep sides, like the metaphorical intestines. So I'm saying, when I look good lyrics, I rarely find them in metal music. This is not gonna, I hopefully, not gonna be a surprise thing. But of course, there are plenty of good lyrics in metal, and Beherit is unfortunately not one of those. I mean, I kind of like they're more vague, they're more mystic versus, say, Archgoat, which is just about goats and fuck you gods and all that stuff. Beherit is more like, let's figure it out later on. And it's just more like a note here and line there, and I'm like, yeah, this is not the most lyrical band. It's not the one that makes me think like, wow, these are genius. More so, yeah, it's all about the feeling. It's all about just getting the music, do the messaging, not the lyrics. And for a lot of people, it's just fine. For me, it's kind of a disappointment. But then again, I really don't expect, especially these days, so much things to happen on the lyrical side and make me go, wow. I am maybe overly critical about lyrics. And of course, there are lots of people who don't give a shit whatever band is writing about. I'm just saying, because this is obviously part of the retrospective charm here. Now, when we go to the album arts, for example, and this is curious, these are very, very atypical in the world of black metal. I mean, look at the, say, Drawing Down the Moon. Isn't really the black and white and all the Satans and the zombies or inverted crosses? You have a space theme, which looks already like you're listening to some ambient album. Or if you take a look at these synth albums. What the hell is this anyway? Very fitting for the music if you ask me, but not exactly looking like your black metal ones. Or what about this? Electric Doom Synthesis. So these are already like pointing out we're not doing black metal. But one of my favorites is with the Oath of Black Blood, because this is just some beautiful piece of art. You have these skeletal beings with the inverted crosses and with the robes of the priests of evil sorts. Beautiful piece of art. And this is, in my opinion, very close to being a kind of a perfect black metal cover art. For some bands, it might be way too, I don't know, weird or death metallic, but given the time and style of early Beherit, with these brutal logos with the inverted crosses and horns and pentagrams and candles, just perfect. Mind you, of course, Beherit logo changed on later on to this, whatever you see nowadays, which is beautiful craft, and you still see the pentagram and all, but it's also delivering you a little bit different message than early on. Then again, similar things happened with Immortal and Enslaved, so could we really call us that surprised? If we take a look at these other albums' cover arts, so like Engram, once again, doesn't really look like your typical black metal art. Not a bad looking cover, but I mean also kind of a maybe misleading. Then again, when we go back to the At the Devil Studio, suddenly we have this Chris Moyen style here with the goat, with the trident, with the inverted cross, and is clearly pointing out back to the early 90s where things were different. With WBRRR, suddenly it's just totally different. And the same things goes with the Bardo Exist, which is done by an interesting artist. He actually contacted me a couple of years ago, made me also a sketch of my face and all that stuff. And this is the art of pain. I have explained it previously. Why so? But he does really cool and scary shit. And in my opinion, this is a very, very perfect cover for an album like this, because it's very vague, and yet at the same time, it's clearly discernible what the hell is happening here. So it's kind of like a devil face, but also like a, I don't know, scratched away. Anyway, so all in all, Beherit is a quite interesting band with quite unique take. Whether it's about visual, whether it's about lyrical content, whether it's about the change in the career and all. Who knows where Beherit will go into the future? I mean, the history has kind of proven that throughout the 35 years or so, it could go anywhere. You have the raw end of black metal, you have the synthesizer parts, you have the ambient parts, you have the combat parts with the black metal and all. And now doing live, it's really, really fascinating to see how Beherit can evolve, or will it regress? Will it grow into some unknown direction which we are unable to predict? I don't know. A fascinating band which, in my opinion, truly deserves the attention and the praise and the worship in a way. No band sounds like Beherit, and that's gonna count for something. Now I know this is a lengthier video than what I aim to do, but I hope this has been just a little bit informative for you, especially the younger generation who might not understand what Beherit is all about, how it came to be and all that stuff. And of course you want to know a lot more. My video interview with Beherit Holocausto is linked to this particular video in the end of the video anyway. So give it a go if you missed it during the COVID years. It's one of those Zoom interviews, so not face-to-face as such because of the lockdowns back in the day. So I apologize for that. And I already had chat with Holocausto after that one day we should do face-to-face interview. Let's hope that will actually happen in year 2025. No promises are made because you never know how it's going to turn out. We might die and all. But let's hope we can do a sequel to that 2020 or so video interview with him back in the days. But if you haven't seen it, despite the sound quality, I urge you to check it out and look for some information and pieces of history, anecdotes and all from Mr. Holocausto himself. I hope you will enjoy it. It's a long one, so grab something, snacks, some drinks and all to go with it, and then sit back and listen to what the man has to say. Now off you go, and if you like the content, let me know. Give the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you don't, feel free to give me the negative feedback. I'm not shy to hear that as well. Off you go, and thanks for your time. Bye-bye.